homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. I am making one of my favorite fall farmhouse dinners. This is essentially sausage and a pan sauerkraut. And so it's not a traditional sauerkraut like a fermented sauerkraut. This is simply cabbage cooked in a pan with apple juice and apple cider to give it some tang and some nice sweetness. And it goes beautifully with sausage. This recipe is originally from Eating Well magazine, and I've modified it over the years, of course, as you do. The original recipe was for a chicken sausage. This is a duck sausage. We raise ducks as one of the animals on our homestead, and they're egg ducks, and occasionally we will butcher them. And usually by the time we butcher them, because they're egg ducks, they're fairly old. The meat is not terribly tender. And so it makes a very nice sausage. And so this sausage is based on a recipe from Hank Shaw in one of his cookbooks. He has a similar one on his website. Hank Shaw is honestfood.net. The website is Hunter Angler Gardener Cook. He also has an incredible Facebook group. If you're still Facebook users, his Facebook group is one of the best on the internet in terms of politeness and people sticking to the topic and people supporting each other. It's really a wonderful place. But I love Hank Shaw's recipes. He tends to cook like I do. He has a lot of global cuisine in his cookbooks from all over the world. And so he just does a lot of different really fun things. And this was his recipe for pheasant Provençal. And so it was pheasant with a bunch of fresh herbs in it. I used duck instead. And then we added, instead of just adding some fatback pork fat to give it some fat, we actually added bacon. And so this has a little bit of bacon in it. I'm going to saute this up, and then we're going to add the onion and the apple. And once that gets going, we'll add the cabbage and the sauce, and it'll come together. This is definitely less than a half an hour from concept to table. So yeah, we'll be back in a few minutes and see how this is looking. So this recipe originally calls for a teaspoon of caraway. Caraway is a really common ingredient with sauerkraut. My husband and I are not lovers of caraway. It's also the seed that's in rye bread. If you've ever had rye bread with the little seeds in it, that's the seed that's in there. And it's mostly the intensity of a whole seed that we don't like. And so I find that if I put some caraway seed either in a spice grinder or a mortar and pestle and kind of just grind it down where you're not getting a giant pop of seed, that we like it a lot better. And so I cut the amount in half. So this is a half a teaspoon instead of a teaspoon. And I would normally just do this in my spice grinder. I have a dedicated coffee grinder that I use for spices. The problem is a half a teaspoon is so small that it just kind of whizzes around. They get airborne and they don't actually get crushed, so I'm using this instead. I imagine some of you have seen this sitting on my counter and wondered if I ever actually used it or if it was just decoration. I don't use it a lot, but it was one of those things that I coveted for years to have a really good one of these that's of good size, and I did finally buy myself one a couple of years ago, so yeah, it's pretty awesome. This sausage was a little bit frozen in the middle still, so we're working our way down through it. And that cabbage that you saw me cut up, that came from my own garden. And I think that was a second cabbage that grew. I grew cabbage this spring, and then I didn't need the space, and so I just left the plants in the ground. And a lot of times when you do that, they will form additional small cabbages late in the season. And so I think that was a late season cabbage from that original plant that got planted in the spring. You could see it was a little bit bug eaten. We have slugs, and they love cabbage. And so I always have some outer leaves that have slug damage. But you peel those off and they're still good. Oh, there's some nice browning there. And I probably picked that cabbage at least a month and a half ago. Cabbage stores really well. If you have an extra refrigerator, or even just a really cool spot in your garage. My garage is running around 40 degrees right now, and so it's pretty cool in there, and so I can kind of just stash things like that in there as well. Yeah, I just put it in an unscented 13-gallon plastic garbage bag and stash that in my extra refrigerator, and it'll hold, usually the outer leaves are a little bit funky and you have to peel it down, but you can have cabbage that you picked months ago that are still good if you store it. That's the reason cabbage is considered a storage crop or a root cellar crop, because you can store them in the root cellar as well. That's the one thing I don't have on this farm that I really, really wish I had, is a root cellar. Someday, I may build one. All right, we're gonna take this out so that it doesn't cook any further. And we'll put it back in once we get everything else in here. I'm gonna try to leave some of that fat behind so that we have something to saute the onions and apples in. The original recipe called for a Granny Smith. I think they were looking for some tang. I just generally use whatever apple I happen to have sitting around, so I don't worry about it much. Apple is an apple, it's all good. We're gonna add in our apple and our onion. Trying to just get these unstuck from each other here. And different apples will cook down differently. Sometimes they fall apart really quickly, and basically you make applesauce, and sometimes you can cook them for 45 minutes and they're still in chunks. That may also be the reason they suggested Granny Smith. I don't think they break down. So we'll see where we end up with this one. These were some apples from a friend, and I actually don't know the variety, so they may end up mushing out pretty quickly, or they may hold up. We'll see. And I'm just looking to get a little bit of translucence on this onion and a tiny bit of browning for flavor, a little bit of caramelization with those sugars. This is a trick I have if I don't want to set my spoon down offside, is putting it over the handle, because I have a gas stove and the heat comes up around the edge, and you can see there's a little bit of burn mark there. If you stick it over the handle, it insulates it so that it doesn't burn your wooden utensils. Lesson learned the hard way. I need a cup of apple juice, and this is actually an apple pear juice from not this fall, but last fall. We had a lot of apples and pears, and we have a homemade cider mill, and so we did a ton of juice that year, and we haven't gone through it all. I've kind of gotten a little bit out of the habit of drinking. I usually use apple juice for smoothies. That's my primary use for it. And then this time of year I make just hot apple cider. But anyway, we still had a lot left, and so I didn't do any cider this year. All right, that looks good. So we're adding the cabbage. This is 10 ounces, give or take. Probably a little more than that of cabbage. Doesn't hurt to have extra if you're trying to use something up. What I like about this recipe is cabbage is inexpensive and it's really healthy. And for the longest time, I really just didn't know what to do with it other than coleslaw. And so I love that this recipe is really tasty, fairly inexpensive to make, and also a great use of cabbage. So I now have 3 or 4 different recipes in my arsenal that are my go-to cabbage recipes. But I look forward to this every fall. And I don't know why I only make it in the fall. It's not like you can't find apples in the spring, or I have cabbage, in May. But I really love it. It's a great fall dish. All right, so we've got our cabbage. We need a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar. For canning, I just use inexpensive apple cider vinegar, but if I'm using it for cooking, I do like the raw cider vinegar that has the mother in it, just a little more healthy. I need a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Because this is a eating well recipe, they tend to be a little lighter on the salt and the fat than a restaurant style recipe, just because they're trying to keep health in mind. Get this, everything in there and coated and wilted. And so that cider vinegar is just gonna wilt everything down, give it a nice tang. Give it a little bit of a pickly quality. All right, now we're gonna add our cider. And also our caraway. We're gonna add our sausage back in as well. This is a really fast recipe. And if you were not using homegrown cabbage, you could also just buy already shredded cabbage. It's a lot more expensive to do that, so my high recommendation is just buy a whole head of cabbage and learn how to cut it up. But if you were in a super big hurry and money was not a big deal, shredded cabbage would absolutely work in this recipe. And honestly, you could have dinner on the table in 15 minutes with shredded cabbage. Everybody's getting happy in there. We're gonna put a cover on this and cook it for about 10 minutes until everything is tender. All right, steamed you up there. So this has been simmering for about 10 minutes. I'm gonna give everything a nice stir. And then I'll probably cook this for a few minutes more just to see if I can concentrate that sauce a little bit. But this is looking really good. So simple, you guys. 5 ingredients. Sausage, apples, onions, cabbage. What did I miss? Apple juice. And then everything else is just pantry staples. A little bit of vinegar, a little bit of spice. Brilliant. All right, a couple more minutes. All right, so I cooked that another 5 minutes or so just to concentrate that, and we're ready to eat. Delicious. And I think you could easily, this is 10 ounces of cabbage. I think you could really easily, and actually this was about 1 pound of meat, and I think the original recipe called for 12 ounces. I think you could easily do 1 pound of cabbage to go with the pound of meat. So lots of, you could definitely make this more cabbage heavy if you were trying to fill more bellies for less money. So there you have it, tribe. A really quick weeknight skillet sauerkraut sausage dinner that's a little different from what you would normally think of when you think of those terms. Give it a try. It's really yummy, and it's been a staple in our family for many years. Thanks for watching, tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment if you have any questions, and subscribe. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.